The story centers around a robot named Susan, who claims she can't tell lies or truths, but she can share events just as she remembers them. Susan was built by a man named Leonard, who chose to live in the desert after becoming overwhelmed by the busy city life. The constant noise and crowds pushed him to seek peace in the vast emptiness. However, living in the desert turned out to be much harder than Leonard expected. To help him survive, he created Susan. Together, they traveled through the desert, with Susan looking after Leonard. Over time, though, the harsh desert conditions took a toll on her, damaging her body until she could no longer walk. Left with no choice, Leonard had to take Susan apart to keep going. Eventually, Leonard's supply of batteries for Susan ran out, but he made a promise to her before she shut down. He vowed to repair her. One day, after running out of water, Leonard uses a pipe with a crank and faucet attached to try and find water. He plants the pipe in the ground, cranks it, and opens the faucet, but no water flows. He walks a bit farther, repeating the process until he finally strikes water and fills his canteen. He also survives by finding and eating a type of root vegetable growing in the desert. When he's not moving through the sands, Leonard spends his time caring for Susan. He cleans her head and makes small adjustments, hoping one day he'll be able to bring her back to life. One day, while wandering through the desert, Leonard stumbles upon a woman lying on the ground. He notices foam around her mouth, a clear sign of poisoning. Acting quickly, he rolls a root vegetable nearby to examine its base. Just as he's doing this, the woman suddenly wakes up, choking. Without hesitation, Leonard gives her some water to help her breathe. He then rushes back to his camp to grab some antitoxin pellets. When he returns, he crushes the pellets and carefully places them in her mouth, nose, and ears to counteract the poison. Hours later, the woman slowly regains consciousness. Leonard, concerned for her well-being, offers her one of the root vegetables he's been surviving on. To help her avoid another close call, he shows her two different roots. In his left hand is the safe one, a cerniptus root. In his right hand, he holds the dangerous one, a dactyl root, the one that had poisoned her earlier. The two roots look almost identical, except for a small green ring at the base of the cerniptus root. Leonard warns her to always check for the green ring when finding roots in the wild. Leonard then asks for her name, introducing both himself and Susan, his robot companion. The woman seems hesitant to share her name, so Leonard casually suggests that they could pretend they never met. She agrees and quietly walks away. Continuing his journey through the desert, Leonard comes across a pile of discarded junk. Curious, he inspects the items, hoping to find something that could help repair Susan. He tries to open a tin can, but to his surprise, it triggers a small explosion, knocking him unconscious. Sometime later, the woman who had left earlier finds Leonard lying on the ground. Instead of reviving him right away, she goes through his belongings, including the head of his robot companion, Susan. After eating some of Leonard's cerniptus root stash, she stumbles upon a comic book that Leonard had created. The story, titled The Quest for the Key, follows a solitary samurai named Todd. In the tale, a young boy delivers a message from the king to Todd. When Todd asks how the boy got there, the child explains that the king sent him across the Great Crystal Lake using his fastest boat. After reading the comic, the woman carefully removes tiny shrapnel pieces from Leonard's forehead. Once he regains consciousness, he notices the bandage on his head. The woman admits she read his comic book, and Leonard, though a bit upset, tells her it was meant to be private. Feeling a little guilty, the woman apologizes and finally reveals her name, Rolla. After finishing their meal, Leonard continues to examine the pile of junk and discovers a battery. Hoping it will work, he connects it to Susan, but instead of functioning normally, the robot malfunctions and starts repeating the phrase, "The crystal is close." Rolla, intrigued, suggests that it might mean the crystal lake from Leonard's book is nearby. Before they can discuss it further, Susan fully powers on and tells Leonard that she missed him. Noticing the bandage on his head, Susan immediately offers to scan him. After a quick check, she reassures him that he'll be fine. As Leonard begins to share his recent journey with Susan, Rolla interrupts, asking if Susan had mentioned the crystal lake earlier. Unfortunately, the battery runs out and Susan shuts down again, leaving the question unanswered. Rolla turns to Leonard and tells him he doesn't need to hide the crystal lake from her, saying she's a believer. Confused, Leonard asks what she means, but Rolla seems to think he's playing dumb. She points out that he wrote about the crystal lake in his comic book. She promises not to tell anyone about the lake and reveals that she came to the desert by herself to find it. She explains that she didn't bring anyone with her because she's afraid that if people discovered the lake, they would destroy it. Leonard listens, then calmly tells her that he's been in the desert for a long time and hasn't seen any trace of such a lake. He insists that he made up the crystal lake for his story. Despite Leonard's explanation, Rolla remains convinced that he's searching for the lake. She asks him to join her on the quest, insisting that he knows the desert well enough to help. Leonard clarifies that his only goal has been to find parts for Susan, not a mythical lake. Rolla points out that he could easily find the parts in the city, but Leonard explains that it's too expensive and that he dislikes city life. Still, Rolla holds on to her belief and asks again for Lernert's help in finding the lake. Seeing her determination, Lerner finally agrees, and her scowl turns into a broad smile. As they continue their journey together, Lerner uses his knowledge of the desert to gather edible vegetables, since Rolla knows little about desert plants. When they eventually run out of water, Lerner teaches her how to locate it. At first, Rolla grows frustrated when she can't seem to find a good spot, but Lerner encourages her, reminding her that the reward will be worth the effort once she sees the water flowing. As Rolla keeps searching for water, she spots something shiny in the distance. Curious, she wants to go find out what it is, but Lerner warns her not to run off without first filling her canteen with water. Frustrated, Rolla drops the water pipe in anger. When she looks back at the distance, the flashing object is no longer there. They continue wandering through the desert, and soon Rolla notices a plant she recognizes. She picks a few leaves and tells Lerner to put them in his canteen. Lerner hesitates, worried the plant might be dangerous, but Rolla hints that it will make the water taste better. She finally convinces him by saying she'll try it first. After they put the leaves in the canteen, Rolla reaches for it to take a sip, but Lerner decides he wants to drink first. He takes a sip and admits the water tastes much better with the leaves. Pleased, Rolla picks a few more leaves and adds them to their canteen. One day, as they're walking, they meet a man traveling in the opposite direction. They ask him how long he's been walking, and the man replies that it's been 3 weeks. Rolla offers to let the stranger join them, but he doesn't answer. Instead, the man starts walking toward them to continue his journey. Sensing danger, Lerner pulls Rolla aside, ready to protect her if something goes wrong. But Rolla, determined, tries to follow the man. Lerner holds her back, but she insists on going after him. Rolla catches up and asks the stranger why he's wandering in the desert. The man simply replies that he didn't like where he was, and he keeps walking because he still doesn't like where he is. As the man walks away, Rolla turns to Lerner and scolds him for stopping her earlier. Lerner defends himself, saying he was only trying to keep her safe. Rolla argues that she doesn't need his protection, but when Lerner suggests they protect each other instead, Rolla agrees. As they continue on their journey, Lerner suddenly shares a memory. He tells Rolla the stranger reminded him of his old neighbor, who used to trim his bushes until they were just bare twigs. Curious, Rolla asks who she reminds him of. Lerner pauses and then says she reminds him of his mother. That night, they set up camp, and Rolla notices Lerner working on his book. She smiles and tells him she's excited to read the next chapter when it's done. The next morning, while Lerner is still asleep, Rolla decides to sneak a look at his book. In the new chapter, Todd has found a female companion to join him on his dangerous journey. Todd admires her for her wisdom and determination. Rolla quietly places the book back before Lerner wakes up. Once Lerner is awake, they start exploring the junk scattered around their camp. Rolla discovers a cylindrical object hidden inside a canister. When Lerner examines it, he realizes it's a polycarbine fusion-centric energy core, still functioning at half capacity. This device could power Susan, their robot companion, for a lifetime. Excited, Rolla quickly grabs Susan's head and connects it to the power source. As Susan comes online, she asks Lerner if he started assembling her body. Lerner explains that they just found the right power source, but he reassures her that he'll find the rest of the parts soon. Rolla then asks Susan what she knows about the Crystal Lake, reminding her that she had mentioned it being nearby before. Susan confirms that she was referring to that lake, but reveals that they're far from it now because they had gone in the wrong direction. Curious, Lerner asks how Susan knows about the lake. Susan explains that the information was included in her programming. Rolla then asks for directions and how long it would take to reach the lake if they walk at Lerner's normal pace. Susan calculates that it would take over 2 weeks of walking to get there. As they begin their journey, Susan offers advice to help them reduce exhaustion. She suggests Lerner keep his heart rate around 150, but he no longer has a heart monitor, having traded it away long ago. Susan also provides the correct directions to keep them on course. She advises them on the best times to rest and the right amount of food to eat for their energy needs. Rolla, a bit skeptical, asks Susan why she thinks she knows what they need. Susan explains that she has thousands of algorithms running, constantly calculating all the variables affecting both of them in real time. Intrigued, Rolla then asks if Susan was aware when she wasn't connected to a battery. Lerner explains to Rolla that Susan didn't know anything while she was offline, but her internal clock kept running. As soon as she was rebooted, she was able to tell exactly how long she had been offline. Rolla admits she asked about this because Susan mentioned she had missed Lerner when she came back online. After another long day of walking, Lerner notes they've covered 39.1 kilometers. Susan recalls that when she still had a body, they used to walk much less, around 3 kilometers a day. Back then, conserving energy was crucial, and they only walked enough to gather food and water. She then warns them that walking long distances in the desert can be dangerous. There aren't enough edible plants around to meet their calorie needs, making survival difficult. Lerner reveals to Rolla that Susan had quietly told him earlier that they might not reach the lake. According to Susan, the number of edible plants in the direction they're heading is even lower than where they've already been, so they probably won't have enough food to make it. However, Lerner hints that they don't need to follow Susan's advice strictly, as her predictions are based on calculations, not certainty. Despite the warnings, Rolla and Lerner decide to keep going toward the lake. Soon, most of the plants they find are dactyl roots, and Susan advises them to start rationing the small amount of food they have left. As they keep moving, Rolla stumbles upon a pile of junk. She suggests that they should start building a body for Susan from the scraps, but Susan insists it's not the priority. Their primary focus should be finding the lake. Rolla agrees that the lake is important, but she confesses it's not her main goal. What she really wants is to be happy. Curious, she asks Susan if she wants to be happy too. Susan, being a robot, points out that happiness isn't part of her programming. Rolla presses further, asking if Susan was sad when she missed Lerner. Susan explains that she was programmed to miss him if she was offline for more than 96 hours. Feeling the moment is right, Rolla asks Lerner to sit down. She takes a deep breath and confesses that she likes him. With a smile, she adds that he didn't have to program her to say it. After they run out of food, Lerner asks Susan if there's a route that would use less energy, but the robot tells them there's no other way. Lerner says they can't turn back now, so Susan advises them to find some edible plants quickly. Not long after, they come across some plants they don't recognize. Susan points out that the vegetable looks like a pomble beet, which is a poisonous root with yellow skin and pink stripes. Rolla notices that the plant they found has spots, not stripes, but Lerner doesn't want to take any chances because a pomble beet could kill someone in just 30 seconds. When Susan tells them it will take 8 more days to reach the lake, Rolla boldly takes a bite of the plant and asks Susan to count to 30. While Susan starts counting, Rolla tells Lerner to get out his antitoxin pellets. He argues that the pellets aren't strong enough to fight off pomble beet poison and urges Rolla to spit it out. Rolla insists that there's a chance the plant isn't poisonous. When Susan finishes counting, they're both relieved to see that Rolla doesn't feel sick. Since the plant isn't poisonous, they gather enough food to keep going. After several more days, Rolla and Lerner finally reach the lake. Rolla pauses for a moment, gazing at the beautiful shore, then giggles with joy and runs straight to the water. Lerner follows her, ignoring Susan's advice to test if the water is safe to drink. Rolla and Lerner wade through the lake's shore, laughing and playing. Over the next few days, Lerner teaches himself how to catch fish, grateful to Susan for guiding them to the lake. Later, as he inspects Susan, he notices programs that he didn't write. He realizes they are leftover codes from the replacement parts he found in the desert. One of the memory chips even had the lake's coordinates stored in it, leading Rolla to conclude that someone else must have been there before them. When Lerner turns Susan back on, he tells her that he has reprogrammed her to set her own primary objective, and she will no longer miss him when she's offline. Susan asks about her body, and Lerner confesses that he never attempted to build her a new one because he feared being left alone. Susan gently reassures him, telling him she would never leave him alone, and reminds him that he never programmed her to say that. As they search for wooden parts to construct Susan's body, Lerner reveals that he finally knows how to end his book. He tells Rolla that Todd, the hero of his story, sacrifices his life to save the king. After Todd dies, his body is placed on a table, and the king and his servants bow their heads in respect. Suddenly, Lady re-enters and connects a golden tube from her chest to Todd's. The tube glows and Todd miraculously comes back to life, opening his eyes. Rolla laughs, amused by Lerner's dramatic ending. Susan recalls that they stayed by the water for 6 weeks before venturing to the cities to tell people about the lake. Many didn't believe their tales of soothing waves, abundant fish, and the humid air, but a few brave souls decided to follow them. Now more than 200 people live by the lake, along with 20 robots. And with the movie comes to an end. Thanks for tuning in, guys.